Spy games and double agents, MI6 secrets finally come to light. It was an unseasonably warm spring afternoon in London when the British National Archives announced the declassification of one of the most sensitive and controversial files in MI6 history. The files promised to reveal Cold War betrayals, covert missions that had been locked away for decades, and, most disturbingly, the identity of a mole at the highest echelons of British intelligence. For years, whispers had circulated within intelligence circles about a betrayal that cut to the core of the agency. Today, those whispers would turn to headlines. On Fleet Street, the corridors of the Times and the Guardian buzzed with anticipation. Journalists prepared their questions, historians dusted off long-forgotten papers, and former spies, now retired and cautious, watched the unfolding drama with wary eyes. Among them was Eleanor Shaw, a seasoned intelligence analyst turned investigative journalist, who had spent nearly a decade trying to uncover the truth about MI6 Cold War operations. When the announcement came, she immediately booked a flight to London. As she stepped into the National Archives, the heavy oak doors closed behind her with a resolute finality. The air inside smelled of aged paper and secrets long buried. She was led to a secure room, where the files awaited, a dozen thick folders labeled Operation Nightfall, Project Avalon, and the chilling mole at the summit. Eleanor flipped open the first folder. The papers inside detailed covert missions across Berlin, Moscow, and beyond, missions that had changed the course of history but were never made public. Operation Nightfall had been MI6's top-secret effort to infiltrate Soviet intelligence in the early 1960s. The Cold War was at its peak, and Britain's position was precarious. The files detailed how British agents had managed to place several deep-cover operatives inside the KGB, feeding information back to London. One name kept appearing, Richard Haversham, a junior diplomat turned MI6 agent, whose daring exploits in East Berlin had become legend among insiders. According to the files, Haversham had uncovered critical details about Soviet missile deployments that helped NATO adjust its defense strategies. But the papers also revealed a darker side. A mole within MI6 had betrayed Haversham's identity to the Soviets, leading to his capture and execution in 1963. The question burning through Eleanor's mind was, who had betrayed him? The next folder, Project Avalon, described a series of operations that took place in the mid-1970s. These were attempts to destabilize the Soviet government through sabotage, misinformation, and support of dissident groups. One document stood out, a handwritten letter from an anonymous source warning MI6 of a leak within the agency. The handwriting matched none of the known agents but bore an eerie similarity to the notes of a man named David Ellis, who had been head of counterintelligence from 1972 to 1978. Ellis was a respected figure, praised for his unwavering loyalty and strategic mind. But could he have been the traitor? The file contained no definitive proof, only circumstantial evidence and unsettling hints. The last folder, ominously titled Mole at the Summit, contained files that were previously deemed too sensitive for release. They suggested that the betrayal ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Top-secret communications revealed that the mole had access to the highest levels of MI6, someone trusted by the agency's director, someone who could manipulate entire operations for personal or ideological gain. The files pointed to a man named Julian Mortimer, who served as deputy chief of MI6 during the 1980s. He was known for his charisma and his close relationship with the then Director General. According to the papers, Mortimer's name had come up in a closed investigation in 1987 but had never been formally charged or publicly named. Instead, the case was quietly shelved.
Why?
As the files hit the press, the reaction was immediate and explosive. Former intelligence officers expressed outrage at the exposure of secrets that could endanger lives still living under false identities. Politicians called for inquiries, and a new generation of spies braced themselves for the repercussions. Eleanor, meanwhile, found herself drawn deeper into the mystery. She managed to secure an interview with Michael Graves, one of the few surviving members of the Cold War intelligence community. Graves was cagey but willing to speak. "Betrayal is the worst poison in this business," he said grimly. "You don't just lose information, you lose trust, lives, the very soul of your agency." Eleanor left the interview with Michael Graves unsettled. His words echoed in her mind as she walked along the Thames embankment, the wind tugging at her coat like the ghosts of a bygone era. The betrayals documented in the files were not mere lapses. They were calculated blows that had crippled MI6 from within. The agency's reputation for impenetrability, carefully cultivated over decades, now lay in ruins. Back at her temporary office, Eleanor pored over more documents. Among the papers was a fragile, yellowed photograph. It showed a group of men standing on the steps of an MI6 safe house in London, circa 1983. One man stood apart, his face sharp and confident, Julian Mortimer. Cross-referencing the dates, Eleanor noticed that key leaks had occurred precisely during Mortimer's tenure. Classified cables, detailing undercover agents' identities, Soviet counterintelligence strategies, and British diplomatic intentions, had vanished from MI6 archives or been rerouted. One particular memo caught her eye, a coded dispatch from Moscow, intercepted by British Signals Intelligence in 1985. The message was brief but chilling: Avalon compromised. Await further instructions. The codename Avalon was linked to the 1970s sabotage campaign. Had the Soviets known about the operation years in advance? If so, how? Eleanor's investigation brought her to the doorstep of Dr. Andrew McAllister, a retired cryptographer who had worked with MI6 during the height of the Cold War. Now living quietly in the Cotswolds, McAllister welcomed her into his modest home lined with bookshelves sagging under the weight of espionage literature. "I remember the Avalon files," McAllister said, steepling his fingers. "We knew there was a leak, but it was like chasing shadows. The codebreakers couldn't find a pattern in the betrayals." He pulled out a faded notebook filled with scribbles of code fragments and suspected cipher keys. Mortimer's access was so broad, he could have fed the Soviets information that made Avalon unravel before it even began. The more Eleanor dug, the more she realized the betrayal wasn't just a matter of ideology or money. The mole seemed to be playing a deeper game, one that spanned decades and involved manipulating not only Britain's secrets but the very course of Cold War politics. She contacted a former CIA operative named Jack Reynolds, who had worked alongside MI6 agents during joint operations. Over a secure call, he revealed that American intelligence had long suspected a high-level mole within MI6, but the political ramifications of exposing him had made Washington hesitant to press the issue. Mortimer was a master at covering his tracks, Reynolds said. When he moved into the deputy chief role, he built a web of loyalists and informants. Anyone who got too close simply disappeared from the records. As Eleanor compiled her findings, she unearthed a disturbing pattern of unexplained deaths, disappearances, and sudden resignations within MI6 from the late 1970s through the early 1990s. The files contained oblique references to an operation called Silent Echo, a clandestine campaign to silence those who might reveal the mole's identity. Among those victims was Richard Haversham, the daring operative betrayed in East Berlin decades earlier. His capture was not just a loss but a calculated message to deter others. One file detailed an attempt to warn MI6's Director General at the time, Sir Geoffrey Langdon, about Mortimer's duplicity. The warning came from an encrypted letter smuggled out of a covert safe house in Prague. The letter's author, identified only as Shadow Fox, described Mortimer's ties to Soviet handlers and his manipulation of intelligence flows. Yet, the warning had been ignored or suppressed. The files hinted at internal power struggles, where protecting the agency's public image took precedence over rooting out the traitor. Eleanor realized that to expose Mortimer fully, she needed more than documents. She needed testimonies from those who survived the internal purges. She sought out Claire Dawson, once a rising MI6 analyst who had abruptly resigned in 1988, citing personal reasons. Claire agreed to meet in a quiet cafe in South Kensington, her eyes wary but determined. She spoke in low tones about the paranoia that gripped MI6 in the 1980s, the atmosphere of suspicion that eroded trust. "We were told to watch our backs, even among ourselves," Claire said. "Mortimer wasn't just a leader, he was a puppet master. He knew our fears and exploited them." She described how analysts who questioned Mortimer's decisions found themselves reassigned or forced out. It wasn't just about spying on the enemy. It was about controlling the narrative, controlling us. Eleanor's investigation was drawing dangerous attention. She began noticing unusual cars parked near her flat, cryptic phone calls with silence on the other end, and emails that disappeared moments after being opened. One evening, as she returned from the National Archives, a man approached her in a dimly lit alley. His face was obscured beneath a cap. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Miss Shaw," he said, voice low and gravelly. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Before she could respond, he slipped away into the night. That encounter only steeled Eleanor's resolve. If British intelligence agencies wanted to keep these truths hidden, she would find a way to bring them into the light. Using her network of contacts, Eleanor obtained access to a forgotten storage facility beneath MI6's former London headquarters. Inside, she discovered boxes of unredacted files, minutes from meetings, surveillance logs, and coded dispatches. Among the contents was a file labeled simply Project Phoenix. The file revealed a post-Cold War operation designed to rewrite MI6's history by erasing references to the mole and sanitizing accounts of failed missions. It became clear that the betrayal was not only historic but ongoing. Eleanor's final breakthrough came when she found a recorded confession on an old cassette tape. The voice was unmistakably that of Julian Mortimer. In the recording, Mortimer spoke candidly about his motivations, not ideology, but power. "I played both sides," the voice said. "Not for loyalty, but for control. The game was never about nations. It was about influence, the ultimate currency." The recording ended with a chilling warning: "The game continues. And there are others like me." Eleanor prepared to publish her exposé, aware that it would shake the foundations of British intelligence. The mole at the summit had finally been unmasked, but the consequences of this revelation would ripple far beyond the Cold War's end. As the story went public, MI6 issued a rare statement acknowledging past mistakes and pledging reforms. But beneath the surface, the spy games continued, a reminder that in the shadows, loyalty is often the rarest currency of all. The publication of Eleanor's exposé sent shockwaves through the British establishment. The nation grappled with the revelation that the trusted bastion of national security had been penetrated by a traitor at its highest level. Parliamentary inquiries were launched, former intelligence officials were summoned to testify, and MI6 found itself under unprecedented scrutiny. Yet, despite the uproar, there was an undeniable undercurrent of unease among those who had served in the shadows. The spy community understood that exposing one mole didn't guarantee the end of espionage's murky games. If anything, it served as a stark reminder of how fragile trust truly was. Eleanor's work ignited debates over the ethics of intelligence work and the dangers of unchecked power within secret services. Historians hailed her revelations as a critical contribution to Cold War scholarship, while policymakers debated reforms to prevent future betrayals. But amid the public spectacle, Eleanor remained focused on a quieter, more personal mission, ensuring that the sacrifices of those like Richard Haversham, whose lives had been lost in the deadly game of espionage, were not forgotten. She arranged meetings with families of agents who had perished or disappeared under mysterious circumstances, bringing them some measure of closure by confirming their loved ones' true fates. In the months that followed, MI6 underwent a profound transformation. A new generation of intelligence officers was recruited with an emphasis on transparency and internal accountability, however paradoxical that sounded within a world built on secrets. Yet even as reforms took shape, Eleanor knew the game would never truly end. The Cold War might have faded into history, but new threats emerged, new alliances shifted, and the shadows that concealed double agents and hidden agendas would persist. Late one evening, Eleanor received an encrypted message on a secure channel she had never used before. The sender was anonymous, but the words were unmistakable. "Well done. The game is far from over. Watch the corners and trust no one." The message was a reminder that in the world of spies, every revelation was just the beginning of another mystery. Eleanor Shaw closed her laptop, a mix of triumph and wariness settling over her. She had illuminated one of MI6's darkest chapters, but the story of espionage, with its endless twists, betrayals, and double agents, would continue to unfold, as it always had. And somewhere in the shadows, the next player was already moving their pieces.